The courthouse hummed with a low, steady murmur, punctuated by the occasional scrape of shoes against the polished marble floor. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting sharp lines across the dark wood benches and the gleaming brass fixtures. Inside, lawyers hurried through the corridors, carrying stacks of files, their faces tight with concentration. Uniformed officers leaned against walls, their expressions a mixture of vigilance and fatigue, occasionally adjusting the polished boots that reflected the light in rhythmic patterns. For most people, it was just another day in the judicial system, the routine of a mid-sized American city's courthouse. But for one little girl, the day would be anything but ordinary. 3-year-old Lila Thompson sat perched on the edge of a wooden bench, her small legs swinging freely. She clutched her mother's hand, the tiny fingers gripping tightly as though seeking safety in their shared warmth. Her golden curls bounced slightly with every movement, and her wide, curious eyes darted back and forth, absorbing every detail of the room. Lila was far too young to comprehend the full gravity of the trial about to unfold, yet there was something about her that made those around her take notice. Even in her tender age, she seemed to perceive what adults often overlooked, a sharpness hidden behind the innocent expression of a toddler. Across the courtroom, a police dog sat with rigid precision. Rex, a muscular German shepherd, exuded both calm and readiness. His coat was sleek, a glossy black with flecks of brown near his eyes and paws. The handler, Officer Daniels, kept a steady hand on Rex's harness, but the dog's ears twitched with awareness, scanning the room like an unspoken sentinel. The officers present treated Rex as just another tool in their investigative arsenal, yet there was something about the dog's alertness that hinted at intelligence and intuition far beyond the ordinary. Lila's mother, Rachel Thompson, shifted uneasily in her seat. She had dressed her daughter in a simple pink dress, paired with soft white shoes. Rachel had debated whether to bring Lila at all. Most toddlers would be restless in a courtroom, but something told her that this time, bringing her child might not just be necessary. It might be important. She whispered softly to Lila, reminding her to sit still, to be quiet, to watch and wait. Lila nodded, not fully understanding the words, but absorbing the tone, the sense of gravity, and the subtle cues that signaled the seriousness of the day. The room slowly filled with other spectators, neighbors curious about the case, reporters clutching notebooks and cameras, and a scattering of legal assistants and interns. Their whispers and shifting papers created a constant low-level noise that might have been irritating to anyone else, but Lila seemed to thrive in it. She watched everyone and everything with an intensity that was almost unsettling for such a small child. Each movement, each glance, each subtle shift in the room registered in her mind. Her attention, though small and unobtrusive, was remarkable in its focus. At the front of the room, the defendant sat, his posture tense and wary. Thomas Carver, a man in his late 30s, had been accused of a violent burglary in a nearby neighborhood. His eyes darted nervously between the judge, the jury, and the rows of officers present. He fidgeted with his cufflinks, a small, almost meaningless gesture that betrayed the anxiety he could not fully mask. His attorney, a calm, middle-aged man with a gray streak in his hair, leaned forward occasionally, whispering quiet reassurances. Yet the tension in the air was palpable, a weight that pressed down on the wooden benches, the polished floors, and even the sunlight streaming through the windows. The judge entered, robes swaying slightly, and the courtroom automatically rose. The echo of their footsteps on the polished floor filled the room briefly before everyone was seated again. Her gavel in hand, Judge Hamilton surveyed the room, taking in the rows of spectators, the stern officers, the attentive jurors, and the nervous defendant. She nodded at the clerk, who began calling the court to order. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, and cameras occasionally clicked their shutters, capturing moments that would become part of the public record. As the preliminary formalities continued, Lila's gaze kept returning to Rex. The dog was not just a background figure to her. She observed the subtle twitch of his ears, the way his nose flared, and the slight shift in his weight, as if he were reacting to the tension around him. She pointed at him several times, almost imperceptibly, and whispered under her breath, words so soft that no one could hear them. "He knows." The adults around her assumed it was just the musings of a child, an idle fascination with the animal. But in that tiny phrase, a sense of awareness, even intuition, was quietly revealed. Rachel noticed her daughter's gestures, but chose not to comment. She had learned long ago that Lila had an uncanny ability to notice things most adults would dismiss. Her daughter's attention to detail often astounded neighbors and family friends alike. Sometimes she would point out missing objects in a room or notice when someone was lying about something small but significant. Rachel had never thought her daughter's keen observation skills would intersect with the serious matters of the judicial system. But today, it seemed as if fate had placed them in the right place at the right time. The first witnesses were called to the stand. Police officers described the burglary, their voices steady, recounting how they responded to a late-night emergency call. They detailed the suspect's alleged movements, the broken locks, and the recovered stolen items. Their accounts were precise, almost mechanical, but every so often, their tone betrayed subtle uncertainty. Was it hesitation, or the natural limits of human memory? Lila's eyes flicked from the witnesses to Rex, watching for reactions. Each time a clue or description was mentioned, she pointed subtly, almost as if signaling her own silent commentary to the dog. Spectators whispered quietly, trying to catch every word of the testimony. Lawyers scribbled notes furiously, annotating every inconsistency or key statement. Yet none of them noticed the silent interaction between toddler and canine, the unspoken thread that seemed to bind them. For all appearances, Lila was just a small child, sitting politely, fidgeting with her fingers. But beneath the surface, her attention was razor-sharp, her mind making connections that would soon astonish everyone in the room. The trial had only just begun, yet the energy in the courtroom was already charged. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, subtle but palpable. Lila continued to watch, pointing, whispering softly, and tilting her head at Rex's smallest movements. For the adults, this was another routine day of testimony, evidence, and legal procedure. For Lila, however, it was the opening act of a sequence of events that would soon place her at the center of a courtroom. Drama unlike anything anyone could have predicted. As the first part of the trial unfolded, the small details, the flicker of an eye, the tilt of a head, the subtle shift of weight hinted at the extraordinary. Lila's quiet observations would soon collide with adult logic, transforming a simple courtroom proceeding into a scene of suspense, revelation, and astonishment. What no one yet realized was that the toddler in pink shoes and golden curls had already begun to connect dots invisible to the rest of the courtroom. Her presence was quiet, almost invisible, but it would prove to be the spark that ignited the shockwaves to come. The courtroom seemed ordinary, the proceedings typical, yet something extraordinary simmered just beneath the surface. In the front row, a small child and a police dog shared a silent, unspoken understanding, and for the first time, the stage was set. The calm before the storm was almost tangible, a tension that seemed to hum through the walls, the benches, and even the polished wood of the witness stand. All eyes were on the adults, yet the true drama had quietly taken its first breath, waiting for the moment it would explode into full view. The gavel struck, echoing sharply through the tall, wood-paneled courtroom. Judge Hamilton's stern gaze swept over the room, briefly pausing on the defendant before settling on the jury. Lawyers shuffled papers and adjusted their notes, while the spectators leaned forward slightly, a faint rustle of whispers filling the background. The air was thick with tension, charged with the anticipation of truth being revealed, justice being served. Everyone focused on the procedural elements of the trial, but for 3-year-old Lila Thompson, her attention was drawn elsewhere, to a silent observer at the front of the room. Rex, the police dog. Rex sat perfectly still beside Officer Daniels, his harness snug and eyes alert. His head tilted slightly as the first witness was sworn in. Lila's tiny fingers twitched, pointing subtly at the dog. She whispered something under her breath. Almost inaudible. He sees it. Rachel glanced at her daughter, sensing that Lila's attention was unusually intense, though she did not fully understand what her daughter meant. Most of the courtroom overlooked the small, almost imperceptible gestures of the toddler, believing her interest in Rex was mere fascination. Yet, as the trial would soon reveal, Lila's keen perception was anything but ordinary. The first witness was a neighborhood resident, a middle-aged woman with an anxious expression. She recounted the night of the burglary in painstaking detail, describing a shadowy figure moving swiftly through the backyard, the shattering of a window, and the quick escape of stolen items. Her voice wavered slightly when describing the suspect's movements. Lila's eyes never left Rex, and she pointed again, this time with a firmer gesture, as if signaling to the dog about something the witness had said. The dog's ears twitched slightly, responding to the subtle cues only a well-trained canine could perceive. Next, Officer Daniels was called to the stand to provide his testimony. He spoke methodically about the investigation, detailing the response to the late-night 911 call, the evidence recovered, and the methods used to track the suspect. He described Rex's role, explaining how the dog had detected the intruder's scent and helped officers locate a hidden path leading away from the crime scene. The courtroom hung on every word. Jurors scribbled notes furiously, trying to reconcile the narrative with the photographs and physical evidence presented. As Daniels continued, Lila's attention sharpened further. She noticed subtle reactions from the defendant's small flinches, fleeting eye movements, and the way his fingers tapped nervously against his knee. To the adults, these were minor details easily overlooked, but to Lila, they painted a picture of unease, of someone aware that hidden truths were being revealed. She leaned slightly forward, whispering the words again, louder this time. "He knows." Her voice was soft, yet clear enough that her mother glanced down, puzzled by the confidence in the tiny voice. The prosecutor took a deep breath and pivoted, asking Officer Daniels to elaborate on Rex's training and ability to detect human scent. "Rex has been trained to identify unique scent patterns," Daniels explained, gesturing toward the dog. "Even subtle differences or changes in a person's behavior can trigger a reaction." Lila's gaze intensified. Her small hand pointed directly at Rex, then toward the defendant. The courtroom's adult spectators noticed her pointing, but dismissed it as childlike curiosity. Only Rachel wondered if there was something extraordinary about her daughter's focus. Meanwhile, the defense attorney attempted to undermine the credibility of the canine evidence, questioning the reliability of a dog in court proceedings. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "how can we be sure this animal is responding to legitimate cues and not chance? It's a dog, after all, not a witness capable of reasoning." A murmur of agreement ran through parts of the gallery. Some jurors nodded slightly, considering the point. Lila, however, was undeterred. Her eyes never left Rex. She shifted forward, gripping her mother's hand, whispering under her breath, "Watch closely." Her tone carried certainty far beyond her 3 years. The next witness was the police officer who had discovered a hidden glove near the scene of the burglary. The officer described finding the glove partially covered under leaves, noting that initial searches had missed it. Lila's small head tilted toward Rex, who had already detected the glove and subtly signaled by lowering his body and fixating his gaze on the item. The courtroom was still unaware of the interaction. Lila whispered again, this time a bit louder. He's pointing. Her mother's eyebrows rose slightly. She could feel a shift in the room, though she wasn't sure what it meant. The defendant fidgeted, his nervous energy becoming more apparent with each testimony. Small beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his eyes darted toward the evidence table, then toward Rex. He tried to adjust his posture, straighten his jacket, but the motions were jerky and tense. Leela noticed this immediately. She leaned toward her mother, whispering, "He's hiding something." Rachel, unsure if she should speak, squeezed her daughter's hand and nodded quietly, signaling her to stay calm. Yet even as a toddler, Leela's awareness of the courtroom dynamics was astonishing. The gallery's energy shifted as the prosecutor requested that Rex demonstrate his tracking skills. Officer Daniels led the dog to a set of items on a table, including the glove. Rex sniffed briefly, paused, then sat down, fixing his gaze on the glove as if marking it as significant. The room went silent. Jurors leaned forward, spectators murmured, and reporters scribbled notes furiously. Lila's small voice rose above the hushed whispers. He knows. This time, the statement seemed almost prophetic. A revelation that hinted at the crucial connection between the dog, the evidence, and the defendant. The prosecutor stepped forward, carefully explaining Rex's behavior. The dog has reacted specifically to the glove, he said, pointing to the item. It indicates that the suspect has interacted with this piece of evidence, something the dog has confirmed through scent detection and behavioral response. The jurors' attention sharpened. They observed Rex closely, noting every movement, every shift in posture. The defendant's face paled as realization set in. The evidence, combined with Rex's demonstration, could prove devastating. Lila, meanwhile, continued her silent observation, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around her. She remained focused on Rex and the defendant, whispering soft comments under her breath, occasionally pointing at subtle cues. Adults could not comprehend the clarity in her actions. They assumed a toddler's fascination with a dog was natural, yet in truth, Lila was already processing connections the adults had overlooked. Each gesture, each quiet word, each glance became part of a narrative only she could perceive fully. By the time the court took a brief recess, a subtle shift had occurred in the atmosphere. What had begun as a routine proceeding was now charged with a quiet tension, as if the courtroom collectively sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. The adult participants were unaware that the smallest spectator, sitting in a pink dress and white shoes, had already become a pivotal observer. Her attentiveness and innate understanding had set the stage for the shock that would soon ripple through the room, changing the trajectory of the trial forever. Even as people stretched their legs or whispered softly in the hallways, Lila's attention remained unwavering. Her small hand clutched her mother's, her eyes following Rex, her whispers lingering. He knows. He knows. It was a phrase loaded with insight, confidence, and premonition, and although no one understood its significance yet, the courtroom's ordinary rhythm had quietly shifted. Something remarkable was stirring, and the calm before the storm was fading rapidly, replaced by a suspense that only a 3-year-old and a police dog seemed to fully understand. The courtroom returned to order after a brief recess, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind the last of the murmuring spectators. The atmosphere was electric, an almost tangible hum of anticipation. Jurors returned to their seats, scribbling notes feverishly, while the defendant slumped slightly, shoulders tense, a pale mask of anxiety. The proceedings resumed with a quiet intensity, the kind that made even the seasoned lawyers pause and watch for subtle cues in body language, tone, and expression. Lila, perched on her mother's lap, seemed oblivious to the tension, though in truth, her awareness was extraordinary. The next witness, a teenage neighbor named Jared Collins, took the stand. He described the events of the burglary, with casual confidence at first, but as the questioning deepened, inconsistencies began to emerge. He insisted he had seen the intruder leave through the backyard gate at exactly 11:15 p.m., yet his father's testimony placed him at the corner store at that same time. The prosecutor paused, leaning forward, noting the discrepancy. Lila's eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Jared. She leaned slightly toward her mother and whispered, almost imperceptibly, "He's unsure." Her mother nodded silently, noting her daughter's precision, though she did not yet understand the full significance. Officer Daniels was called again, this time to clarify Rex's tracking methods. He explained the dog's behavior in meticulous detail, how subtle movements, breathing patterns, and even fleeting glances could indicate a connection to a scent trail. Rex doesn't just react to the scent, Daniels said. He reacts to the nuances of a person's interaction with the scene. Small gestures, nervous habits, even hesitation, these guide him. Lila's small hand pointed subtly at Rex. She whispered again, "He knows." Her voice was soft, but steady, carrying a weight far beyond her years. The court remained unaware of the impact her observation would soon have. The defendant fidgeted under the prosecutor's scrutiny. Thomas Carver's eyes shifted nervously from the witness to Rex, then to his attorney, and back again. He muttered under his breath, perhaps trying to steady himself. Every tiny movement was observed by the jury, a jury trained to look for signs of truth and deception. Lila's eyes followed every subtle shift, the nervous tapping of fingers, the quick swallow, the darting glance toward the evidence table. Each of these gestures added layers of meaning, pieces of the puzzle invisible to most adults. Jared's testimony continued, and the inconsistencies multiplied. He insisted he had not seen the intruder touch anything, yet Officer Daniels' report indicated the dog had reacted strongly to the suspect's scent at the scene. The prosecutor highlighted this discrepancy, explaining to the jury that while eyewitness accounts were important, trained canine units could detect nuances beyond human perception. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, the weight of evidence and testimony pressing down on everyone. Lila, however, remained focused solely on Rex and the defendant. She whispered again, "He's hiding it." Her mother, finally sensing the gravity of the moment, squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. Next, the police officer who had recovered the stolen items was called. He described the meticulous process of cataloging, photographing, and analyzing the evidence. Among the items was a glove found partially buried under a hedge, overlooked during the initial search. The prosecutor asked how it had been discovered, and the officer explained that Rex had led him to it, reacting with focused intensity. Lila's eyes widened. She pointed decisively at Rex, her little finger trembling slightly. "He knows," she whispered again, louder this time. The courtroom, still absorbed in procedural details, failed to notice the precision of her observation. The gallery's attention began to shift subtly as the significance of Rex's reactions became clearer. The jurors leaned forward, some whispering quietly to each other, while others furiously scribbled notes. Spectators exchanged glances, sensing a developing connection, though they could not yet articulate it. Lila remained a silent observer, her small body tense, her eyes locked on the interactions between the dog and the defendant. Even the seasoned courtroom staff felt the undercurrent of something extraordinary unfolding. Rachel noticed the change immediately. Her daughter, small and quiet, had been whispering repeated phrases. "He knows." "He's hiding it." "Watch him." At first, Rachel assumed it was childish imagination. But with every new reaction from Rex, every subtle flinch from the defendant, Rachel realized her daughter's instincts were uncannily accurate. She swallowed hard, holding Lila closer, wondering just how much her child could perceive and how the courtroom would react if they understood. The prosecutor paused, looking directly at Officer Daniels. "Can we demonstrate the dog's reaction here?" he asked, his tone calm but precise. The handler nodded, guiding Rex toward the table with the recovered items. Rex sniffed each piece carefully, pausing briefly at items that held no significance, then finally sitting and staring intently at the glove. The dog's body was rigid, a clear indication of recognition and relevance. Gasps ran quietly through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged astonished glances. The jury's focus sharpened instantly, eyes tracking every movement. At that moment, Lila's whispered words were crystal clear. "He knows," she said, her tiny voice carrying an almost uncanny certainty. For the first time, the adults seemed to notice her. A child sitting calmly, pointing decisively at Rex. Some smiled, thinking it cute, but others froze, realizing her gesture coincided perfectly with the dog's reaction. It was as if the toddler and the K-9 unit shared an unspoken understanding, a connection invisible to all others in the room. The defense attorney attempted to downplay the significance. "Your Honor, it's a dog," he said, voice rising slightly with frustration. A toddler noticing a dog reacting is anecdotal at best. It cannot prove guilt or innocence. The judge nodded, considering the point, but the courtroom energy had already shifted. Lila's observations, combined with Rex's demonstrated abilities, had injected a quiet tension into every corner of the room. Even the defendant looked uneasy, his posture stiffening, eyes flicking nervously between the dog and the young girl. Next, the prosecutor asked Officer Daniels to demonstrate the dog's ability to track the suspect's scent. The officer led Rex around the room, allowing him to interact with various objects. The dog paused near the glove, then sat firmly, signaling recognition. The jury scribbled notes rapidly, noting the dog's precision and consistent behavior. Lila leaned forward, her tiny hand pointing firmly. "There," she whispered again. Her voice carried certainty, and for the first time, a few spectators began to understand the extraordinary clarity of her observations. The defendant's anxiety grew, visible to everyone in the room. Every blink, every swallow, every shifting of posture suggested a man increasingly aware of the scrutiny he was under. Lila noticed every micro-expression, every subtle sign, and she whispered again, "He knows. He can't hide it." Rachel's heart pounded as she realized the truth. Her daughter's observations, though seemingly trivial to adults, were increasingly corroborated by Rex's reactions and the evidence being presented. By the time the witnesses' testimonies concluded, a subtle but undeniable pattern had emerged. Jared's inconsistencies, combined with Rex's precise reactions and Lila's quiet but accurate observations, created a narrative invisible to the untrained eye. The courtroom was no longer just a place of testimony. It had become a stage where perception, intuition, and innocence intersected in extraordinary ways. Lila, small and silent, had already become an unlikely force shaping the unfolding events. Even as the judge called for a short recess, the energy in the room was different. Jurors whispered amongst themselves. Lawyers exchanged hushed comments, and spectators speculated quietly about the dog's remarkable demonstration. Lila remained focused, whispering softly to herself and pointing at Rex. "He knows. He knows." The words repeated like a mantra, signaling that the quiet toddler had observed something no adult had yet fully grasped. The calm before the storm had passed. The tension, suspense, and anticipation of revelation now filled every inch of the courtroom. It was clear to anyone paying attention that Lila's observations were more than coincidence. Her focused attention, combined with Rex's skill and the inconsistencies in witness accounts, had created a network of insight invisible to the untrained eye. Though she was just 3 years old, she had already begun to influence the direction of the trial. Setting the stage for an extraordinary and shocking revelation that would leave the entire courtroom gasping. The threads of truth were being woven in real time, and Lila, small, observant, and silent, was at the center of it all. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet as the proceedings continued. Every chair was filled, the jurors leaning forward with pens poised, and spectators craning their necks to catch the smallest detail. The air felt electric, thick with anticipation. The defendant, Thomas Carver, fidgeted in his seat, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously to every corner of the room. No one noticed the subtle shift in the tiny observer perched near the front 3-year-old Lila Thompson. Her small hand was gripping her mother's tightly, and her wide, observant eyes were fixed on Rex, the police dog, who sat attentively beside Officer Daniels. For Lila, this courtroom was not overwhelming. Instead, it was a stage of intricate patterns, tiny gestures, and subtle signals. She had already observed every flinch, every hesitation, every shift in posture from the defendant. She had noticed the dog's reactions, the twitches of ears and tail, the subtle sniffing of the air around the evidence table. In her tiny mind, connections were forming, a web of cause and effect adults couldn't yet see. She leaned forward slightly, whispering softly under her breath, "He knows." This time, her voice was firm, clear, almost as if she were announcing a truth the courtroom was not ready to hear. Rachel Thompson glanced down at her daughter. Her pulse quickened. Lila's whisper was no longer a quiet murmur. It carried purpose and certainty. Rachel wondered if anyone else had noticed, but the adults were still immersed in procedure, evidence, and witness testimony. Lawyers scribbled notes, jurors exchanged glances over the tops of their pads, and the judge's gavel punctuated moments of routine. No one noticed the silent interplay between toddler and dog, the unspoken conversation forming in the space between observation and intuition. It was then that the prosecutor decided to ask Officer Daniels a pointed question. Has Rex ever indicated the presence of evidence that humans have overlooked? The courtroom fell silent. Even the defendant paused, his mouth opening slightly as though caught mid-thought. Officer Daniels nodded gravely. Yes, Your Honor. There have been multiple instances where Rex has reacted to subtle traces things humans missed entirely. He gestured toward the dog, whose gaze remained focused and unwavering. He is trained to detect even the faintest sense, and his responses often guide our investigation. Lila's hand shot up slightly, pointing at Rex with intensity. Her mother whispered, trying to soothe her, but Lila's small voice rang out clearly. He knows. The courtroom froze. Judge Hamilton's eyes widened slightly, as did those of the attorneys. A hush fell over the spectators. A toddler, barely able to speak in full sentences, had just articulated something that resonated with the courtroom's collective curiosity. The words seemed absurd, yet there was an undeniable truth in her confident tone. The prosecutor's eyes flicked toward Lila, then back at the dog. A thought seemed to click in his mind. Your Honor, he said slowly, I would like to demonstrate Rex's ability to identify relevant evidence, which may confirm the validity of the observations made here. Officer Daniels nodded, stepping forward with the dog. Rex sniffed the air carefully, circling the evidence table. Every observer watched intently, noting the dog's posture and reactions. Lila leaned forward, whispering again, almost chanting. Softly, he knows, he knows. The tension in the room escalated as Rex approached a seemingly innocuous glove lying half-hidden beneath a folder. He lowered his body, sat firmly, and stared at it. The jurors murmured among themselves, exchanging glances of disbelief. Spectators gasped quietly. The defendant's lips pressed into a thin line, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized the significance of the dog's behavior. Lila pointed decisively at Rex and the glove, her tiny voice carrying a clarity that drew attention. There. The gallery erupted in whispers. Some chuckled softly, thinking it was simply the innocence of a child pointing at a dog. But others paused, suddenly aware that her gesture coincided precisely with Rex's trained response. The prosecutor approached the evidence table, nodding to Officer Daniels. "The glove," he explained calmly, "was discovered near the crime scene, but was initially overlooked. Rex's reaction confirms its connection to the suspect." The jurors leaned in, their pens scratching furiously on notepads. The courtroom was collectively aware, for the first time, that this evidence was now pivotal. The defense attorney's confidence faltered. He rose quickly, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, this is a dog's behavior, and a child's pointing at it. Neither constitute reliable evidence," he argued, voice tinged with frustration. Judge Hamilton raised a hand, signaling him to sit. The courtroom was tense. The combined force of Rex's reactions and Lila's observations created a palpable shift. Even seasoned lawyers could feel the momentum tilting toward revelation. Meanwhile, Lila remained focused, whispering to herself and gesturing subtly. "He can't hide it. He knows." The words, simple yet precise, seemed to echo in the minds of those paying attention. The adults were beginning to understand that something extraordinary was occurring. A toddler's observations, combined with a police dog's trained instincts, had intersected in a moment that defied the expectations of ordinary courtroom procedure. It was as if the room's energy had pivoted around the quiet certainty of a child. Officer Daniels continued the demonstration, moving Rex toward the suspect. The dog froze briefly, then fixated on the defendant. Every muscle was tense, the eyes sharp and unwavering. The jurors scribbled furiously. Spectators whispered in astonishment. The defendant swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His attorney looked concerned, realizing that the combination of Rex's response and Lila's unwavering observation was more powerful than they could contest through argument alone. The prosecutor seized the moment, addressing the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing is not mere coincidence. Rex's behavior, corroborated by the precise observations of this child, aligns with the evidence we have gathered. This is confirmation that the suspect interacted with the crime scene, leaving behind critical proof." The jurors leaned in further, eyes wide, pens moving rapidly. The room was electric with realization. A child, unnoticed for most of the trial, had now become central to understanding the truth. The defendant's composure faltered. He shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath, as if unable to believe the unfolding events. Lila pointed again, her small voice rising slightly. "He knows." It was the third time she had spoken these words in the courtroom, yet now they carried authority. The jury, spectators, and even the court officers began to sense the weight of the moment. The toddler's perception had illuminated a path that adult logic had struggled to navigate. The gallery's whispers grew louder as reporters scribbled notes rapidly. Cameras clicked, capturing the remarkable moment of a child's observation coinciding with the police dog's reaction. Lila's mother felt a shiver run down her spine. She had always known her daughter was observant, but to see her words influence the momentum of a criminal trial was surreal. Rachel squeezed Lila's hand, feeling both pride and awe at the clarity and courage her daughter displayed without fully understanding the implications. Judge Hamilton leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. The courtroom was no longer about routine procedure or evidence alone. It had become a stage where innocence, intuition, and trained skill intersected in extraordinary ways. "We will proceed carefully," she said, her tone steady but alert, signaling that Rex's behavior and Lila's observations would be taken into account as the trial continued. The courtroom collectively recognized that something extraordinary had occurred. A toddler's simple words, "He knows," had already begun reshaping the perception of evidence in the room. As the session ended for the day, The tension did not dissipate. The jury lingered in their seats, whispering quietly, exchanging glances, replaying the events they had just witnessed. Lawyers and officers discussed the implications in hushed tones. Even the defendant seemed aware, in some deep, instinctual way, that the balance of the trial had shifted irreversibly. And through it all, Lila remained perched calmly, golden curls bouncing slightly as she clutched her mother's hand. She was unaware of her profound impact, yet her small gestures and whispered words had begun to turn the tide of justice. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the echo of the extraordinary events lingered. Outside, reporters jostled for position, eager to capture the remarkable story of a toddler and a police dog. Their silent partnership, revealing truths adults had almost missed. Lila skipped lightly beside her mother, oblivious to the attention she had garnered, her small mind already processing the subtle patterns she had observed in the room. That day, in a mid-sized American courthouse, a 3-year-old had made history in the quietest, most powerful way imaginable. By the next morning, word of the extraordinary courtroom scene had spread like wildfire. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing, their voices overlapping as they recounted the unbelievable moment. A 3-year-old girl pointed at a police dog and spoke 2 words that left everyone speechless. Inside, the atmosphere was even more intense. Every juror looked visibly more alert, the attorneys more cautious, and the spectators buzzed with murmurs of anticipation. Lila sat quietly beside her mother in the same front row seat, her feet swinging above the floor. She looked small and unassuming, clutching her little stuffed bunny in one hand while her eyes scanned the room. But her gaze was focused not on the people whispering about her, not on the flashing cameras, but again on Rex, the police dog who had become her silent partner in this strange unfolding drama. The defense had spent the night preparing to undo the damage. They'd called it a coincidence, a child's imagination, a well-trained dog reacting to handler cues. But as the judge entered and court came to order, the energy shifted again. Even the defense attorney's voice trembled slightly as he began. "Your Honor," he said, adjusting his glasses, "we must remember this is a court of law, not a spectacle. A child's reaction, no matter how curious, should not influence the perception of evidence." But before he could continue, the prosecutor rose. "With all due respect, Counselor," he said, "this case is about truth. And truth sometimes reveals itself in unexpected ways. What happened yesterday, what everyone witnessed, cannot be dismissed as coincidence." The judge nodded solemnly. "We'll proceed carefully. But the court will allow the continuation of Officer Daniels' testimony and demonstration." Officer Daniels stood tall beside Rex, his hand gently resting on the leash. The courtroom went silent. Even the sound of shuffling papers stopped. Daniels explained that Rex had been trained not only for scent detection, but also for response analysis, the ability to recognize stress pheromones, changes in human scent when a person is lying, hiding evidence, or under extreme fear. "Dogs," he said, "can detect changes we cannot see. They read fear. They read deception." Lila's eyes followed his every word, but her attention drifted back to the defendant. She noticed something the adults hadn't. Each time the dog's name was mentioned, Thomas Carver's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the defense table, trembled just slightly. His breathing changed rapid, shallow. She didn't understand the science, but she felt the emotion. She could see fear. Then it happened again. When Rex was led closer to the defendant for a scent comparison test, the dog suddenly stiffened. His ears perked. His eyes fixed not on the defendant's hands or face, but on something tucked under the table. Officer Daniels frowned, noticing Rex's shift. He followed the dog's gaze. "Rex," he said softly, "what do you see, boy?" The dog moved forward slowly, nose twitching. He sniffed along the edge of the tablecloth, then sat down abruptly, tail rigid, a clear signal of detection. The prosecutor's eyebrows rose. "What is it?" asked the judge. Officer Daniels crouched down, reaching beneath the table. When he pulled back his hand, gasps filled the room. In his grip was a crumpled leather wallet, partially covered in dust. The initials embossed on the corner matched the victim's name. Rachel Thompson covered her mouth in shock. The jury's pens froze mid-air. Even the defense attorneys stumbled backward. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "Where was this found?" "Under the defense table, Your Honor," Daniels replied. "And by the look of it, it's been here for some time." Leela's small voice rose again. "He knows," she said, pointing first at Rex, then unmistakably at Thomas Carver. The courtroom fell completely silent. All eyes turned to the defendant. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The color drained from his face. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Carver jerked away. His breathing quickened, his fingers gripping the edge of the table like he might fall. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, I move to have this wallet examined immediately for forensic evidence. Its sudden discovery and the fact that it was located beneath the defense table is deeply troubling." The judge nodded gravely. "Approved. Bailiff, secure the item." As the bailiff approached, Rex began to bark sharply, one short burst followed by another, each echoing through the wooden walls. Leela didn't flinch. She only watched, her small eyes full of comprehension that no one expected from a child her age. The defendant's composure cracked. His voice broke through the murmuring crowd. "I don't know how that got there," he shouted. "That's not mine." But his words trembled. His tone wavered. And Rex, trained to detect stress and deceit, let out another sharp bark, eyes locked on him. It was like watching the truth rise from beneath the surface. The jurors' expressions changed, one by one. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Even the judge leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't coincidence, it was revelation. Rachel felt her daughter squeeze her hand tightly. "Mommy," Lela whispered. "He's scared. He's lying." Rachel's breath caught. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The forensic team was called in immediately to examine the wallet. Under magnification, faint fingerprints were visible on the leather surface. One matched the victim, as expected, but the others, clear and distinct, matched Thomas Carver. The gasps that filled the room this time were louder, unrestrained. One of the jurors covered her mouth. The prosecutor turned slowly toward the defendant, who had slumped forward in his chair, eyes glassy, face pale. Officer Daniels led Rex a few paces back, giving the dog a command to sit. The animal obeyed instantly, his gaze steady, unwavering. Daniels turned toward the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "Rex has only ever reacted this strongly when he's certain." He recognized that scent immediately. Lila, who had been silent for a long moment, lifted her chin. Her voice soft but firm cut through the chaos. "He took it," she said, pointing at Carver. "He's the bad man." The judge didn't reprimand her this time. No one did. The room fell into an eerie, breathless stillness. The weight of her statement, simple, pure, unfiltered, landed heavier than any argument, any exhibit, any testimony. It was the clarity of a child's truth. The defense attorney stood, trembling slightly, trying to salvage something. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial." But the judge raised a hand sharply. "That will be enough for today. Court is adjourned until the forensic report is complete." As the gavel came down, the courtroom erupted in noise reporters, rushing to the doors. Jurors whispering among themselves, spectators gasping and speculating. Lila sat quietly in the middle of it all, her small figure serene amid the chaos. She reached over and patted Rex's head gently. The big German shepherd licked her hand once, as if acknowledging the bond they now shared. Officer Daniels crouched beside them, smiling faintly. "You've got a sharp eye, little one," he said. "Rex likes you." Leela grinned. We both saw it. Daniels looked at her curiously, as though he half believed her and half feared the accuracy of what she just said. Outside the courthouse, the news spread like wildfire. 3-year-old identifies clue that cracks case. Blared headlines across every local network. Experts debated the uncanny connection between the child and the canine. Psychologists called it intuitive empathy. Others called it a miracle. But inside that courtroom, those who witnessed it firsthand knew one thing for sure. The moment the child pointed and said those 2 words, "He knows," everything changed. The mask had slipped. The lies were unraveling. And as the sun set over the courthouse that evening, Officer Daniels walked Rex to his car, pausing to glance back at the marble steps where Rachel and Lila stood. The little girl was waving, smiling softly, her eyes calm and confident. She didn't fully understand what she'd done. But somewhere deep inside, she knew that telling the truth, no matter how small you were, could change everything. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. The air carried that strange, heavy silence that comes before a storm, the kind that made even the reporters whisper instead of shout. Inside the packed courtroom, cameras flashed, pens clicked, and everyone waited for what the prosecution had called the defining moment. Thomas Carver, the defendant, sat pale and motionless at the defense table. He hadn't slept. His tie hung loose, his eyes red-rimmed from a night of interrogation and disbelief. His lawyer sat beside him, whispering quietly, but Carver barely listened. His mind replayed the same moment over and over, the dog's sudden focus, the wallet under his table, and that child's tiny voice cutting through the air. "He knows." That phrase haunted him like an echo he couldn't escape. Across the room, Rachel Thompson sat with her daughter Lila, perched calmly on her lap. The child was munching quietly on a cracker, legs swinging above the floor, her big brown eyes scanning every face with quiet curiosity. She was oblivious to her fame, to the dozens of reporters who had dubbed her the little truth teller. But Rachel wasn't oblivious. She'd seen the way people looked at them as they entered. She felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, every click of a camera. Still, she held her daughter tightly. There was something in Lila's calmness that steadied her, a kind of unexplainable certainty that her child had seen something everyone else was just beginning to understand. The judge entered. The gavel struck once, silencing the murmurs. "Court is now in session," Judge Hamilton said. Her tone was firm, but her eyes carried the curiosity of everyone in the room. "The forensic team has completed its analysis. We will now hear their report." The door at the side of the courtroom opened, and Detective Grace Morgan entered, holding a sealed folder. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman, the kind whose presence commanded attention. As she took the stand, all eyes followed her. "Detective Morgan," the prosecutor began, "please present your findings." She nodded, flipping open the folder. "We conducted a full forensic analysis of the wallet discovered under the defense table yesterday. Our tests confirm that it belonged to the victim, Matthew Riggs. In addition to his fingerprints, we found clear partial prints matching the defendant, Thomas Carver." The defense attorney rose immediately. "Objection. Those prints could have been transferred in any number of ways. My client lived in the same neighborhood. He could have touched it before the alleged crime even took place." The judge nodded, but gestured for the detective to continue. "Furthermore," she said, her voice steady, "we found fibers from a jacket, consistent with the one seized from Mr. Carver's apartment. DNA testing confirms the presence of his skin cells inside the wallet's inner pocket. That placement suggests direct handling. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Even the jurors, who had been trained to maintain neutral expressions, looked shaken. The defense attorney sank slowly back into his seat, his objection dying on his lips. But it wasn't the evidence that silenced the room. It was Rex's reaction. As soon as the detective mentioned the DNA evidence, the police dog, sitting calmly beside Officer Daniels, let out a low growl. Not aggressive, but alert. Daniels placed a calming hand on his fur, whispering a quiet command. The growl ceased, but Rex's eyes remained locked on Carver. Then Leela spoke. "He's scared again," she said softly. Her voice carried like a whisper through the stillness. Everyone turned. Even the judge froze. Lila wasn't smiling or fidgeting. Her expression was grave, focused. Her small finger lifted and pointed toward the defendant. Rachel tried to shush her, but Judge Hamilton raised a hand. "It's all right," she said softly. Then, turning toward Carver, her tone hardened. "Mr. Carver, is there anything you'd like to say before we proceed further?" The defendant's jaw clenched. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the table. His lawyer whispered urgently, "Don't say a word." But the pressure, the evidence, the child's piercing gaze, the dog's unyielding stare, it all pressed down like a vice. Carver's breath quickened. "You all think a dog and a kid know more than evidence?" He snapped. "That's ridiculous." But his voice cracked mid-sentence. His anger sounded desperate, not defiant. Lila tilted her head slightly, studying him like a puzzle she was putting together. "You looked at Rex," she said simply. "And you looked away when he barked." Rachel's breath caught. The entire courtroom went silent again. The prosecutor's eyes widened. Even Officer Daniels seemed frozen. Carver's hands shook visibly now. What's she talking about?" He stammered. The prosecutor stepped forward. "That's an excellent question, Mr. Carver. Why did you react that way when the dog barked? Why did you look away?" Carver glared, but his eyes flickered with panic. The kind that betrayed guilt. Rex barked again, sharp, decisive. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Carver jumped, chair scraping against the floor. "You're not doing this to me again," he shouted, standing abruptly. "Mr. Carver." The judge barked, slamming the gavel. "Sit down." But it was too late. The entire courtroom had seen it. The trembling hands, the twitching jaw, the sweat dripping down his forehead. The child's quiet words had struck exactly where it hurt most, his fear of being seen. Rachel held her daughter close. "It's okay, honey," she whispered, though her heart pounded. Lila leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "He doesn't like Rex," she said matter-of-factly. The detective spoke again, voice steady and calm. "Your Honor, we also ran scent traces from the wallet on Rex." The dog immediately alerted to the same, scent found on the defendant's jacket. "The correlation is unmistakable." The prosecutor smiled faintly, not triumphant, but certain. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. The forensic proof aligns with both witness behavior and canine indication. The defendant's guilt is now irrefutable." The defense attorney's shoulders sagged. "Your Honor, my client." But Judge Hamilton interrupted. "Mr. Carver, you have one chance to tell the truth." The courtroom held its breath. Carver's mouth opened, then closed. His body shook. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, but Carver yanked it away. For a moment, it looked as though he might deny everything again. Then, something in his expression broke. The fight drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion. He dropped his head into his hands. "It was an accident," he whispered. Gasps rippled through the room. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Carver continued, voice cracking. "He came home early. I panicked. I didn't think The prosecutor's tone was low but firm. So you admit you were there? Carver's shoulders slumped. Yes. Rachel closed her eyes, clutching Lila tightly. The child looked up, her innocent eyes calm, unshaken. She didn't understand the full meaning of the confession, but she knew that the tension had changed, that the room was finally lighter, the lies gone. Rex let out a soft whine and sat down, ears relaxed. The judge exhaled, tapping her gavel once. Let the record show that the defendant has confessed to his presence at the scene. The prosecutor nodded. Your Honor, I move to enter this confession into the record. The gavel struck. The moment was sealed. Lila looked at Rex and smiled faintly. The dog looked back at her, tail wagging slowly, as if they had both known this ending long before the adults did. When the court adjourned for the day, the reporters swarmed again. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched out, and voices shouted questions. But Rachel shielded her daughter and walked silently out the side door. As they reached the courthouse steps, Officer Daniels approached with Rex trotting at his side. The big German shepherd lowered his head, and Lila reached out to pet him gently. You did good, kid, Daniels said softly. You and Rex, that's a team I won't forget. Lila smiled, patting Rex's fur. He knew the truth, she said. And I saw it. Daniels crouched beside her, nodding. Sometimes, he said, truth comes from the quietest voices. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes. She's always been quiet, she said. But she sees everything. As they walked away, the courthouse doors closed behind them, sealing the echoes of confession, truth, and innocence. The world outside was noisy and bright, but inside that small child's heart was a peace far beyond her years. The calm certainty that honesty, no matter how small, can pierce through the loudest lies. And for the first time in days, everyone, from the judge to the jurors, finally believed what the 3-year-old had been saying all along. He knows. The morning after the courtroom confession, the town of Maplewood woke to a storm, not of thunder, but of headlines. Every news outlet carried the same story. 3-year-old girl and police dog uncover murderer in shocking courtroom twist. Across America, people were glued to their screens, replaying the video clip that had gone viral overnight. The tiny girl's calm voice, the dog's piercing bark, and the man's breakdown that followed. Rachel sat on the edge of her small living room couch, the TV flickering across her face. Layla was on the carpet, stacking blocks, humming to herself. Every time the story replayed, Rachel turned the volume down a little more, as if she could muffle the world's fascination with her daughter. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Reporters, journalists, talk shows, even morning news anchors from across the country. Everyone wanted to talk to the little girl who made the courtroom gasp. Rachel felt torn. Pride swelled in her chest for what Lila had done, but fear tugged at her heart like a persistent whisper. Her daughter was just a child, too young to be treated like a symbol or spectacle. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. When she opened it, Detective Grace Morgan stood there, wearing a small smile. Beside her, Officer Daniels held Rex's leash. The big dog wagged his tail as soon as he saw Lila, who instantly dropped her blocks and ran toward him. "Rex!" she squealed, hugging his neck. The German shepherd nuzzled her gently, tail thumping against the carpet. Rachel smiled, stepping aside to let the officers in. "I had a feeling we'd see you again," she said. Daniels chuckled, crouching to give Rex a pat. "He wouldn't stop pacing this morning until I said we were coming here. Guess he missed his new partner." Lila beamed. "He's my friend," she said proudly. Grace looked around the cozy home, framed photos, children's drawings, soft toys neatly arranged. "You've got quite a brave little one here," she said. "We just wanted to stop by and thank her." What she did in that courtroom. It wasn't just luck. It was instinct. She noticed what no one else did. Rachel nodded, her eyes soft. She's always been different. Quiet, but she picks up on things. Sometimes I think she understands more than I do. Grace crouched beside Lila, meeting her eye level. You helped us find the truth, Lila, she said gently. You and Rex make a great team. Lila giggled. We listen. Grace blinked, curious. Listen? The little girl nodded seriously. People talk with their faces too. And Rex listens to hearts. The detective glanced at Daniels, who gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Smart kid, he murmured. As the officers stayed for coffee, Rachel watched her daughter and Rex play on the floor, the big dog gently rolling over while Lila brushed his fur with her small hands. For a few moments, the chaos outside their door felt far away. But the peace didn't last long. Later that afternoon, Rachel's phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID read, State Prosecutor's Office. Mrs. Thompson, said a calm voice when she answered. We're calling to inform you that the press has filed for permission to publish court footage involving your daughter. Given her age, we'll need your consent. Rachel's heart skipped. Footage? You mean the video of her pointing at the dog? Yes, ma'am. It's already circulating online, but official outlets need parental approval. We can advise you on protection rights, but given the public interest, suppression may be difficult. Rachel hung up, staring blankly at the phone. Protection rights or not, the world already knew her daughter's name. By evening, a small crowd had gathered outside their apartment, reporters holding cameras, photographers snapping pictures, even neighbors craning their necks for a glimpse of the little girl who'd solved the murder. Rachel pulled the curtains shut and turned off the lights. Lila peeked out curiously. Why are they here, Mommy? Rachel knelt beside her, brushing her hair from her forehead. They just want to talk, sweetie. But you don't have to say anything. You did your part already. Lila tilted her head. Are they mad? No, love, Rachel said softly, forcing a smile. They're amazed. That night, as Lila slept curled up with her stuffed bear, Rachel sat awake by the window. The flashing lights from news vans glowed faintly through the blinds. She thought of how quickly things had changed, how her quiet, shy daughter had suddenly become a national story. Her mind drifted to Carver, now in a holding cell awaiting formal sentencing. The man's broken expression still haunted her. The way he'd said, "It was an accident," replayed over and over in her head. Guilt and relief tangled in her chest. Relief that justice was served. Guilt that her child had been the one to bring it to light. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. When Rachel opened it, a woman with a camera crew stood there, flashing a dazzling smile. Good morning. We're with Sunrise America. We'd love to feature Lila's story, maybe even bring Rex on set. Rachel's patience finally snapped. She's 3 years old, she said sharply. She doesn't need to be on television. Please leave. The reporter blinked, momentarily taken aback. Of course, ma'am. We just thought. But Rachel closed the door before she could finish. Behind her, Lila's sleepy voice called out, Mommy? Was that someone for me again? Rachel sighed and smiled faintly. Yes, baby. But not today. Later that afternoon, Rachel took Lila and drove to the park, the one with the pond, where ducks floated lazily across the water. It was quiet, calm, far from the noise. She watched her daughter feed crumbs to the ducks, her laughter echoing softly through the air. For the first time in days, Rachel felt peace. As they sat on a bench, Grace and Daniels appeared again, walking Rex along the path. Fancy seeing you two here, Daniels said, smiling. Rachel chuckled. We needed a little break from the cameras. Grace nodded knowingly. Can't say I blame you. The DA's office has been getting calls nonstop. Half the country wants to meet your daughter. Rachel looked out at the pond. She doesn't need fame, she said quietly. She just needs to be a kid. Grace's tone softened. We'll make sure she gets that. Then she knelt beside Lila again. Hey, partner, she said. Rex has a medal ceremony next week. The department wants to honor him for his work on the case. Would you like to come? Lila's eyes lit up. A medal? For Rex? Grace smiled. That's right. But I think he'd want his best friend there too. Lila nodded eagerly. I'll be there. When the officers left, Rachel sat silently, watching her daughter's joy. Despite the whirlwind, there was something beautiful in how untouched Lila remained, as if innocence itself had chosen not to break under the weight of the world's attention. That night, as Rachel tucked her in, Lila whispered, Mommy, Rex was brave. But the bad man was sad. Why? Rachel paused. Because sometimes people do wrong things when they're scared. And when they finally tell the truth, it hurts them too. Lila thought about that, then nodded. But it's better to tell, right? Rachel smiled softly. Always. As the room fell quiet, Lila snuggled into her blanket, her voice drowsy but certain. Rex said thank you, Mommy. Rachel froze, half smiling, half wondering if she'd heard right. He did? Lila's eyes fluttered closed. In my dream. Rachel brushed her daughter's hair, heart swelling with emotion. Outside, the night air carried the distant hum of a world still talking about them. But in that small room, it didn't matter. The truth had found its way through fear and noise, carried not by power or authority, but by the pure eyes of a child and the loyalty of a dog. And for the first time since it all began, Rachel believed what the judge had said before dismissing court. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the one we almost didn't hear. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city courthouse when Officer Daniels adjusted his tie in the mirror. Today wasn't about trials or evidence. It was about honor. The Maplewood Police Department was hosting a public ceremony to recognize bravery and truth in the line of duty. And though he'd stood on many podiums before, today felt different. Today, the real hero was a child. Across town, Rachel helped Lila into her tiny blue dress, one with white lace at the collar and a matching bow in her hair. The little girl twirled in front of the mirror, giggling. Do you think Rex will like my dress? She asked. Rachel smiled. He'll love it. You look beautiful. Lila picked up a small hand-drawn card from the table, a crayon sketch of her, Rex, and a golden medal. In the corner, she had scribbled, Good boy, Rex. When they arrived at the courthouse steps, cameras were already rolling. But this time, Rachel didn't shield her daughter from them. Today wasn't about spectacle. It was about closure. Rows of officers stood in their pressed uniforms. The American flag waved in the gentle morning wind. A crowd gathered, townspeople, reporters, families, all eager to see the little girl and the dog who had brought truth to light. Detective Grace spotted them and hurried over. You made it, she said warmly, crouching to Lila's level. You ready to see Rex get his medal? Lila nodded enthusiastically. Is he nervous? Grace laughed. He's a dog, but maybe a little. Then, as if on cue, Rex appeared from behind the stage, wearing a freshly brushed coat and a shiny collar. He spotted Lila instantly and began tugging on his leash, tail wagging furiously. The crowd chuckled as Daniels let him go, and the big shepherd bounded straight toward her. Lila squealed in delight, hugging him tight. You came, she said. Rex licked her face, barking once, a sound so full of warmth it melted the crowd. Cameras clicked, but for that moment, no one cared about headlines. The ceremony began soon after. The police chief took the stage, his voice deep and steady as he spoke into the microphone. Today, we honor not only the bravery of our canine officer, Rex, but also the remarkable intuition of a young girl, Miss Lila Thompson, whose courage helped uncover the truth when all else failed. Applause rippled through the crowd. Lila, perched on her mother's lap, clapped too, her small hands echoing the sound of hundreds around her. The chief continued, "In my 30 years of service, I've learned that courage doesn't always wear a badge or a uniform. Sometimes it comes in the form of innocence, the kind that sees what others overlook." He gestured for Officer Daniels and Rex to step forward. The chief bent down, gently fastening a gold medal to Rex's collar. The dog stood proudly, tail wagging, eyes bright. "And now," the chief said with a smile, "I think Rex would like to share this honor." Officer Daniels crouched and motioned for Lila to come up. The crowd cheered as Rachel gave her an encouraging nod. Lila walked to the stage, tiny and brave, holding her crayon drawing in both hands. Rex leaned his head against her side as she handed the drawing to Daniels. "This is for Rex," she said softly. "He's my best friend." Daniels smiled, his voice catching slightly as he replied, "I think he'd say the same about you." The crowd erupted into applause again, and flashes from cameras danced like stars. But amidst the celebration, Rachel noticed something on the far side of the courtyard, a man standing apart from the rest, his posture heavy, his face half hidden by the brim of a cap. It was Thomas Carver's brother, Mark. Rachel recognized him from the courtroom, where he'd sat in silent shame as the truth about his brother emerged. He stepped forward hesitantly, stopping just a few feet from the stage. Rachel met his eyes, wary but compassionate. When the ceremony ended, as people began to disperse, Mark approached her quietly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, "I didn't come to cause trouble. I just wanted to say thank you." Rachel blinked, surprised. "Thank you?" He nodded slowly. "For helping us find the truth. My brother, he wasn't evil. He was broken. And without your daughter, he might have gone to his grave still pretending otherwise." Rachel swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said gently. "I never wanted this to happen." Mark gave a small, sad smile. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals. He glanced toward Lila and Rex, now playing near the fountain. "Your little girl?" She saw what the rest of us couldn't. He turned to leave, but paused. "If it means anything, my brother worked part-time at the shelter where Rex was trained. That's probably why the dog reacted so strongly. He remembered his scent. And maybe something else." Rachel's breath caught. "Rex knew him?" Mark nodded. "That's what the record said. They'd crossed paths before. Maybe that's why your daughter noticed what everyone else missed." The revelation lingered in Rachel's mind as she walked toward her daughter. Lila was sitting cross-legged on the grass, holding Rex's medal in her tiny hands. "Mommy," she said, looking up, "Rex says he remembers the bad man, but he's not scared anymore." Rachel smiled faintly. "That's good, sweetheart." Layla tilted her head. "He says the man was nice once, before he got lost." Rachel's heart ached with a quiet tenderness. Maybe he was. She sat beside her daughter, running her fingers through Lila's soft hair. Around them, the crowd thinned, the music faded, and the morning sunlight turned golden. After a while, Grace joined them, sitting on the other side of Lila. "You know," she said, "the department's starting a new program, pairing therapy dogs with kids who've witnessed trauma. We were thinking Rex could help lead it." Lila's eyes widened. "Rex gets to help people?" Grace smiled. "Yes, just like he helped you." Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. "That's perfect." The chief called the officers back for photos. and Grace stood to join them. Rachel watched as the teen gathered around Rex, their smiles genuine, their pride palpable. For once, it wasn't about crime or tragedy. It was about hope. When it was over, Rachel lifted Lila into her arms. "Ready to go home, my brave girl?" Lila nodded sleepily. "Can Rex come over tomorrow?" Rachel chuckled softly. "We'll see." As they walked to the car, the wind carried the sound of applause lingering in the air. Lila rested her head on her mother's shoulder, the metal glinting in the sunlight. "Mommy?" she murmured. "Yes, baby? Do you think telling the truth made the world better?" Rachel paused, looking up at the bright blue sky. "I think it did," she said quietly. "At least our little corner of it." Lila smiled faintly, already half asleep. "Then I'm happy." Rachel kissed her forehead, holding her close. "So am I." As they drove away, the courthouse grew smaller in the distance. The place where truth had been uncovered, where a child's voice had carried more power than any testimony, and where a loyal dog had followed his instincts to the end. The story would live on in newspapers and broadcasts, retold by strangers across the country. But for Rachel and Lila, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about the bond that had changed everything between a girl, a mother, and a dog who refused to ignore what was right. And as the car disappeared down the quiet, tree-lined road, the metal on Lila's lap shimmered softly in the sunlight, not as a symbol of glory, but of truth, innocence, and courage that could never be silenced.